Hello and welcome back. Thanks for joining. My name is Berit and today I have another book that I would like to talk about. Waste Tide by Chen Qiufan. Waste Tide is a kind of science fiction novel, but not outer space science fiction. It's earthbound science fiction. And it's also an eco-thriller because this book has a very distinct ecological dimension to it. Waste Tide was published in Chinese in 2013 and translated into English in 2019 by Ken Liu, who you might be familiar with because he also translated the Three Body Problem series, at least the first and the third volumes. And I honestly don't really remember how I came upon this book. So I think I found it in one of my researches about existing environmental literature. And after having the book on my radar for about a year and a half, I think, I now finally read it. So today I want to share some thoughts on this novel. Waste Tide takes place on Silicon Isle, a fictional place off the southern coast of China. On Silicon Isle is the world's largest recycling site for electronic waste. And this book tells the story of the people on Silicon Isle and the power structures that are at work there. One of our main characters is Mimi, who is a waste girl, and that means that she lives on Silicon Isle under very bad circumstances because being a waste girl doesn't exactly pay well, and her job is to sort out the electronic waste, and that of course brings with it a lot of issues concerning health and safety and stuff like that. We also have Scott Brandle, who visits Silicon Isle because he works for a company called Terra Green Recycling. And that company wants to invest on Silicon Isle to build a large recycling site. And with him is also Chen Qiufan, who is another main character in the book. He is originally from Silicon Isle, but he has lived in the USA for most of his life, so now he kind of comes back to where he grew up and translates for Scott and tries to navigate the kind of difficult dynamics at play in this place. Also, you have three clans in this book who kind of have divided the power over Silicon Isle amongst themselves. So you also have kind of like power dynamics there, and in this book you follow different characters from different of the groups. You have kind of the rich people who try to invest in Silicon Isle, you have the very poor waste people who are looked down upon by pretty much everybody else. You also have the Silicon Isle natives who are partly members of the clans that have the power over the island. And so you can see that you have different groups here that kind of collide in the course of the book. And you have a lot of questions between like rich and poor, and also connected with that environmental justice issues that come in this book as you follow the characters that all kind of have their own agendas that are not necessarily quite clear in the beginning. So yeah, that's more or less what I'm gonna say about the plot at this point, because I don't want to spoil anything, but I think it's no surprise if I say that in the course of this book, these forces between the rich and the poor and the natives and the foreigners, of course, will collide and will lead to quite some conflict. So yeah, Waste Tide is pretty much a distinctly environmental kind of science fiction thriller, and while some parts of it are very science fiction, like hard science fiction I guess you can say, other parts of it are eerily, scarily realistic, I think, and those parts mostly concern topics of post-humanism, I guess you can say. Because in this book you meet a lot of people that have, for example, augmented reality glasses, or that have kind of prostheses that enhance what your body can do. So you have kind of like artificial eyes that are better than biological eyes, and all, like, you know, you can just take any part of your body and change it for something artificial that kind of makes your body better in some way, that kind of makes your body maybe stronger, maybe faster, maybe more beautiful, whatever. And I think this part of the novel is eerily realistic. While reading, I thought like, well, we're not that far away from that. And this is one of the things that I enjoyed most about the book. This kind of like atmosphere of feeling, well, this isn't so far away from us. It's also important to say that this book is not set in the distant future. It's more like in the 2030s, I guess. You don't get a year for when this takes place. The only hint that I can remember is that at one point the book tells you that Kaisong, who is kind of a young man, maybe in his late 20s, early 30s, I would guess, that he was a child in the beginning of the 21st century. So I'm guessing that this book might take place around 2030, which isn't that far away. But yeah, I thought that the whole enhancing your body with prostheses and kind of changing your body parts for better artificial body parts, I thought this was kind of scary, also not too unrealistic. I also really enjoyed the overall setting and atmosphere of the book. I thought that the descriptions of Silicon Isle and life there and how the people experience life there and everything around that was very well done. I also read that Waste Tide was inspired by Guiyu, which is seen as the world's largest waste site for electronic waste. Which is a place where the author has been. I don't remember whether he has lived near the place or whether he has visited the place, or maybe both. But anyway, the book is inspired by this existing electronic waste site, and that might explain why the setting and the atmosphere there, at least for me, seemed very realistic. I also thought that the story itself was very good and very interesting. The book has 3 parts, and to be honest, I did need the whole first part to kind of get into the story, get into the flow, into the narrative style, and to kind of understand what's happening. I'm guessing that this has different reasons. One reason might be that the book starts with Scott Brandle, who is an outsider to this place. He's the one coming to invest with Terra Green Recycling. So he kind of tries to navigate the society on Silicon Isle, and he doesn't understand all the nuances necessarily. He has to learn about the clans, and so he's kind of from outside. And because you start with him, I think that you as a reader also kind of need to find out who has which agendas, who wants what, etc. So that's kind of part of the story, I guess. And another factor is that with regard to language, I think the book is pretty advanced, so I kind of needed some time to get into it. And also while reading, I had to look up quite a handful of words. And that might just be because I'm not the native English speaker, and I read the book in English. But yeah, that might have contributed to me needing like 100 pages to get into the story, which was not necessarily a bad thing. It was just like, okay, I cannot read this in bed. I kind of have to be awake to read this so that I get what's going on. At times I did find it a bit hard to follow the story also throughout the whole book, and I'm honestly not sure if that's the story or if that was me, because I think it's very much possible that that was just, you know, me not understanding every single word on the page and maybe sometimes not getting every single causality. But yeah, it might also be the story. I kind of read mixed views on that. Some people also said that they found that the story kind of jumps around a bit and doesn't always make too much sense. I kind of decided to roll with it and think, well, supernatural things kind of are happening, or well, unrealistic things are kind of happening. So I'm gonna roll with it, and it usually took me like a paragraph or 2 or maybe a page or two to be like, okay, I guess now I understand what's going on. And that was not a lot in this book. It was like maybe 3 or 4 times where I was like, I'm not sure I'm getting what's happening now. But I didn't think that this was like a huge problem or anything. So it's not really criticism, it's more like trying to describe my reading experience to you. The book also surprised me quite a few times. One time is around the midway point, where also the book kind of changes its pace a bit, and the tempo is a lot higher in the second part than in this first part, I'd say. And there are also quite some moments in the story that surprised me with regard to kind of what was happening. Those were also sometimes the points where I wasn't sure whether I was understanding what was happening. And also some points that were kind of like surprisingly violent, which is not a bad thing in a book for me. So yeah, it was anything but boring kind of to read this book. Because a lot is going on. Another thing that I want to mention here is the environmental theme of the book, because I think it's done pretty well. I've read a few environmental books, and I think the problem with environmental literature, or especially the literature that we call Sci-Fi, climate fiction, it can often be perceived as a bit preachy and moralizing, and sometimes kind of boring, because either the environmental problem is dropped to the background, or it's kind of overtly moralizing, preachy, as I said, very didactic and kind of flat sometimes. And I think this is kind of an issue that some sci-fi books can have. And this is not an issue here, I think. One of the things that I enjoyed most about the book was actually its environmental theme, because I think it was done very well, that you kind of have this distinct perspective on pollution, on waste, and also on environmental justice, and especially environmental injustice, which is all connected with the whole issue of rich and poor in this book. And I thought this was done pretty well. I really enjoyed this, because a lot of sci-fi can tend to be a bit too pedagogical, which is not the case here. So I would say that this book is an example for environmental fiction done well. I wouldn't necessarily actually categorize it as sci-fi, because the climate and climate change, that doesn't play too much of a role here. It does play a bit of a role, but the climate is not the main focus in this book. The main focus is pollution and environmental justice and injustice, which has to do with pollution and the fact that in this book the whole world dumps their electronic waste on Silicon Isle, and the people there kind of have to deal with it. So these topics were done really well in the book. I think this was one of the things that I enjoyed most while reading, because I felt that it was both very distinctly there, but also in a way that was fitting for the story, that was not kind of flat, not moralizing in a like overtly pedagogical way, which is something that I don't enjoy while reading. So I really liked how it was done here. I think those were pretty much the thoughts that I wanted to share about Waste Tide. My only issue with this book was that I kind of sometimes struggled with keeping up with the story. And as I said, that might very well just be on me reading this book in a foreign language. Maybe I should have read it in German, I don't know. But I still enjoyed it, even though I was sometimes kind of confused what was happening. I'm very glad that I read this book. It kind of gave me a lot of thoughts, because, as I said, the whole environmental justice and social justice kind of dimension I thought were very, very interesting here. And yeah, kind of thought-provoking to read about. If you want to read a kind of eco-thriller science fiction book that takes up issues of waste, of kind of posthumanism, I guess, and environmental and social justice, then I would absolutely recommend this book to you. As I said, I think the language is pretty advanced, which is not a bad thing. I think it's also fitting for the story. Because it's taking place on an electronic waste site, I think it's okay that you have quite a lot of technical and also biological words here. So I thought this fitted the theme of the book. And last but not least, I also think that the edition that I have has an incredibly beautiful cover, which I could stare at like for hours, because it also kind of like shines in different shades of blue. So yeah, that's also not bad about the book, the cover. So those were my thoughts on Waste Tide. Please let me know what you think. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and maybe I'll see you in the next one. Bye.